Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Hayes. I'm the managing partner of Alston & Bird, and on behalf of the entire law firm and our diversity committees across all of our offices that are beamed in here today, I welcome you and thank you for being here today. We're really excited about this and have been looking forward to it. I'm particularly excited to welcome so many of our good clients here and their special guests. I see a few members of the judiciary here, so thank you for joining us. Diversity is a core value of the law firm, and while there is a lot to be done, we take a lot of pride in what we have done in the area of diversity and inclusion, both within the firm and more generally in our communities. And a big part of that is our annual event when we recognize Black History Month and participate in the celebration. And in the past, we've had a number of very good speakers. We've had Ambassador Young, Representative Lewis, Reverend Lowry. And this year, we have a group of equally esteemed speakers, and we are thrilled and very, very thankful to have you with us. Now, Angela Payne James is a partner here with the law firm, and she also is the chair of our Atlanta Diversity Committee. And so, Angela, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our speakers.
Right.
So thanks again for being here, and I look forward to spending some more time with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for being here today. We are so excited to see everyone, and we're so excited about this event. As we were thinking about what to do and how to observe Black History Month this year, the incredible events of the past year really came to mind in terms of all of the protests and the movements that we were seeing out of Ferguson and New York. And we thought about having a discussion that was focused on that. We all witnessed an intense wave of nationwide protests and renewed activism on civil rights issues in this country. And we really wanted to focus on the protest movement, past and present, and how it's developed over time as a tool to advance civil rights changes in our country. So today we have three wonderful speakers, each of whom have a unique perspective on that topic. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking with each of them individually about their perspectives, and then we'll have a group dialogue. To save as much time for discussion and potentially a few questions at the end from the audience, I'm going to be relatively brief in our introduction. So with that, I will go ahead and get started and welcome our first guest. As most of you know, Dr. C.T. Vivian is a civil rights legend. Dr. Vivian has been a civil rights leader for decades. He is a distinguished minister, an author, a protest organizer, an SCLC leader, a freedom rider, a member of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s executive staff, and the founder of the C.T. Vivian Leadership Institute. Dr. King once called him the greatest preacher to ever live. No small compliment. He is the recipient of many awards and honors, and in 2013, in recognition of his lifetime of service to the nation, President Obama awarded Dr. Vivian the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So welcome, Dr. Vivian, and thank you so much for being here today. We're honored.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So Dr. Vivian, we'll jump right in. You and other leaders of the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s employed multiple strategies to advance the cause of civil rights for African Americans. And one of those strategies involved the freedom rides into Mississippi in the early 1960s. And I was wondering if you can talk about why that particular method of protest was chosen, and of course tell us a little bit about what that felt like going into Mississippi in those days, and also talk about why that strategy or how different strategies were chosen and which were the most effective to achieve means of change.
The most important thing that has to be seen is that that strategy was totally new, right? And that had we had it before, we would have had less trouble sooner, all right? It's that because what we had been waiting for as a people was a strategy for change. we had one thing that was useful, and that was the legal one. But it really wasn't useful because you couldn't get it out of the North. As soon as it came to the South, it was cut off, all right? It didn't make any difference what the issue was. Southerners were not going to vote in our favor. And if when they were forced to, they didn't like it, so they weren't going to obey it, right? And so we had to have a different strategy that went beyond legalities. Legalities just didn't get it, right? Now, so what that meant is that the only thing that was open was something that Martin had done a lot of work on before he left Boston. Now, we had all read a little, and we had college presidents who were coming back from India telling us about Gandhi and et cetera, but not effectively, all right? And nobody was being trained in nonviolence, right? And so that the strategies we're talking about now, all in one way or the other, are around nonviolence. And then maybe we go through some talk about law, right? It's coming back the other way. Instead of trying to deal with law first and then maybe go to the heart of the matter. Remember, Martin King didn't lead a legal movement. He led a moral and spiritual movement, all right? And because newspapers don't understand that very much, right, is that you hear very little about it. But it was a moral and spiritual movement. What we were doing was challenging America on what it said it believed, right? And it obviously didn't. The land of the free and the home of the brave. Well, how free and how brave, all right? And what issues were you dealing with, right? You had to go beyond what was existing, and you had to challenge. And this is why the letter from the Birmingham jail was so important, because here these boys figured they had it made, right? They were bishops in one thing or the other, and so they're going to challenge, right? And and they ran, but their following was in racist situations, right? They were cultural Christians, not moral and spiritual Christians, you see. That's what the Christian church is about. It's never been moral and spiritual. Isn't it interesting that the ones that are most concerned about the issues that matter are the smallest denominations in the country? All right. When you're, I start to ask you to stand up and tell them that, but don't do it. But you see, but that's it, and we all know it. All right. And you have to be a member of an African American church to even hear anything about it on a regular basis, right? Now, this month, we'll hear some stuff in white churches. It's so that when we start off, we really have to understand that the movement itself was moral and spiritual, all right, and that this is what nonviolence is about, all right. And so when Gandhi, Gandhi would have been a Christian. Except they put him out of the church. He just was going in to find out what it was like, and he found out. So he decided he didn't need that, right? Something better was somewhere, right? And that's what we were all looking for, something better, all right? That America has never challenged itself really on the issues around the issues of racism. decency and indecency, right? They took it for granted that just being white, you were already more decent than anybody else in the world because you were born white, right? So you were the greatest thing, you know. But all over the world, 17% is white, right? All over the world, they were saying, boy, if we didn't have to put up with you, we'd be all right, right? All right. Is that the British talked about, oh man, we're the sun never sets on British soil, right? And they thought that was something to brag about. But not if you've robbed everybody in the world in order to be able to say it, right? And you killed everybody that didn't agree with you. It's that then it became a whole different matter. Then it made a lie out of the religion. It made a lie out of the democratic principles, right? We were the ones fighting for them, all right? We were the ones fighting for them, and we were the ones fighting the wars even when they weren't going to help us, right? The wars didn't help us, quote unquote, right? We did it in spite of it. In fact, we thought that if we fought for the democratic principles, they would be nice enough to really include us and think, oh, isn't it nice that these Negroes that they really believe in these things, right? Well, yeah, we've been believing it all the time. The point being is we weren't able to enjoy them because the nation never lived up to it, right? Well, I have a way of doing that.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. We're interested in everything you have to say. Okay. I wanted to ask, you mentioned the role of the African American church, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the support from the African American community during the 1950s and 60s. Maybe not what was everyone supportive. Did you face any resistance to the protest tactics that you all were using from within the community? And if so, how did you handle those?
Only was there when there were people that was working for white people. That's when you've got some of them saying to white people, "Oh, that's not me." But they were going home that evening saying, let's get ready to go to the mass meeting. You see, is that a totally different kind of thing. In fact, and we all play the game, right? I mean, we all play the game. Like, is that we're friends at work. We're all friends, right? And have never been invited to each other's houses. So how could you be all that friendly, right? But you see, we say it, and that's exactly what we do. We say what isn't true, and you're not supposed to tell them the truth. Because if you tell them the truth, they don't like it, and they're in charge. Right? And so what happens is you know that you can't deal honestly unless you are. This is why I like doing what I do. Because it's all I'm going to leave, right? If I had to come back tomorrow morning and see, well, maybe I would say, we'll teach them later, right? But
well, let me ask you on that point. Obviously, the protest movement of the 50s and 60s, were based on many interracial alliances and multiracial groups that protested. How did you get past that initial fear, that maybe initial dishonesty between the races to actually mobilize multiracial groups, multi-generational groups to come out and make the change that happened?
Because when we talk about multiracial groups, largely we're talking about 90% black and maybe 10%, 90% black and maybe 10% white.
Okay.
You get my point? Is that we can go through. I was in the nonviolent movement 12 years before Montgomery, right? But the only people that we really saw coming that way are people who had a deep sense of respect for everybody, almost in the first place, all right? And this is what I was talking about, those churches that are so small, right? Is that and when we talk about how few people really were together. I was doing nonviolent direct action 12 years before Montgomery, right? And in Peoria, Illinois, we opened Caterpillar Tractor Company, and we opened restaurants and all that sort of thing, right? Caterpillar Tractor Company was the biggest thing outside of Chicago, all right? And we could only sweep floors. And mop them too. I want you to know. All right. Is that that was it, and then the NAACP. I was vice president of the NAACP, but the fellow that was president of it was really on the ball, and he went up and to talk to the president. And they set up this meeting, but he had to do it at noon. Mm-hmm. You know why? Because this guy could only leave his job downtown sweeping floors at noon. Mm-hmm. So they had a noon meeting. And when they left it, only because new law had been passed, right? Mm-hmm. Is could he get by with having the meeting, but deciding who was going to be the test case? Mm-hmm. So he chose the 6 people to be test case, right? We didn't get to choose nothing, but we got at least him to say he would deal with even the test cases. And so what we did was we picked everybody up on every Monday morning, right? Made certain they got there, right? The point being is if you lived in the kind of world we've lived in, right, is that going back to work every day is a difficult thing. Hmm? The kind of jobs you had to do, the kind of work that they thought they should be, or you should just be thankful for them that they let you work at all, right? All right, in the democratic country, right? Now, when we saw that, right, is that we said okay, but we were going to know who. But you know what? It didn't take long. It took less than a week, and everybody was making it on time. When they heard the story, they were there, right? Because all of us depended upon that one big firm. They don't do that in law, but they have more than one big firm, don't they? And that was what made the difference. Now, when they finally were forced to go over the 6 weeks with the 6 guys, they found out they did a tremendous job, and he had picked them for his good, right? But found out that once people knew what was happening and why, they worked very hard, right? and went out of their way. So did the second whole group, because they opened up for everybody. And they hired special people as well. So, it's when we really talk about is that it comes down to, look, everybody can do the kind of little piddling stuff that we all do, right? And or you at least have the degree that lets you in, right? But we never got to come in at any point until you were doing something like that. Why do you have to go out? Why did we have to go out and do that? Well, because it's not a black problem, it's a white problem. See, and this is the first thing that's got to be clear to everybody. Racism isn't a black problem. We're not racist. White people are racist, all right? And they're the ones that don't like black people, right? And even when we don't like black people, white people, we got a reason, and it's a big time reason, Doc. But we have never done anything to white people to make it so that they have a reason to hate us. But I know you've already put on the blackboard a whole list of things that white people have done to black people to make black people racist. But we're not racist. We're mad.
Well, Dr. Vivian, I want to ask you one more question before we bring up our next guest, and we talked a little bit about this. A lot of you have seen the movie Selma, about the struggle for voting rights in this country, and you were depicted in that movie. In one of the scenes when the marches are being planned, Dr. King's character contrasts the violent reactions from Bull Connor to protests that had taken place in Birmingham, with the more passive reactions from Chief Laurie Pritchett to protests that occurred in Albany, Georgia.
Yeah.
And so the question is, was the success of the 1960s civil rights protest movement dependent, at least in part, upon violent reactions from law enforcement and the media's coverage of that brutality?
Of course.
And a little bit of a different spin on that is, can a protest that doesn't have drama or conflict bring about change?
Yeah, well, you see, if it wasn't for racism, there wouldn't be the conflict. See, is that we have to do it to survive, right? But when you really look at our role and look at nonviolence works because people are basically good. And they hate to see people messed over, all right? And so when they actually see it, read white newspapers and then read black newspapers right beside each other, right? Is that when we talk about a case, it would tell us who does the dirt, right? When and why it's done, right, is that largely you hear about us because we are not included in the culture. When we're included in the culture, we don't have a problem from us, right? Is that we're willing to go through a lot, just like going to war. We're willing to go through a lot just to try to make you think, right? All right? Not you. But if we can actually come together and where people see each other suffer and understand that suffering, right, is that we will like each other. And one thing about listen, I used to have an anti-Klan network, all right? And I was surprised by how many white people, the only reason they played the racist game is because they were afraid not to, because of the Klan was out after them more than after us. Is that, see, now that sounds strange, doesn't it? But you see, the Klan guys can be big time. Most of them are too uneducated, right, to really be respected by most other white people. All right, is that it is for themselves that they are hating, right? And it sounds strange, doesn't it, sister? I saw a sister with her eyes kind of closed there. I thought she was but that's it. Is that? But when it's just like voting for president. Wow, it was interesting. I never will forget that. Is when a guy called me in the morning. I did a lot of workshops for over 20 years in Iowa, right? Only 3% white, and but boy, as soon as they began to learn what was really going on and how it was really happening, they became. They brought their whole families. They brought their whole families to workshops, right? And because they didn't know, right? When they found out, they understood the hurt,
Right.
And they called me. Of course, it was the Democratic Party. They called me that morning, right, and told me, "Don't worry, we're going to win this one." And I thought, how do you know? And they said, "This one belongs to you." And I said, no. But you see, what had happened, once they found out, they were teaching each other, all right? It's the same thing here. I'm looking at people in this room right now, that when they found out what the game was, went out to make certain that other people found out, right? Is that that's the thing that makes the difference. People don't like to see other people messed over. I don't care whether you're black, white, yellow, pink, polka dot, doesn't make any difference. People respect the humanity of other people.
Right.
All right?
I think that's a good point, and one of the places I think that people get a chance to do that and learn from each other are our academic institutions, and so this might be a good time to welcome our next speaker to the stage, Dr. Tatum. So Dr. Tatum is a scholar, teacher, author, and race relations expert. She is the 9th president of Spelman College right here in Atlanta. She is a clinical psychologist and teaches on the psychology of racism and racial identity development. She's the recipient of numerous honorary degrees, and in 2013, she became the first African-American female college president to receive the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award. So again, thank you, Dr. Tatum. So given your involvement in academic institutions of higher learning over the course of your lifetime, both professionally and personally, you've seen a lot of the evolution of protests as a method for civil rights engagement and change. And you've probably seen a lot of the kind of dialogue that Dr. Vivian just talked about, of learning from each other about past hurts. How are students most recently organizing protest efforts around civil rights issues like those stemming from the lack of criminal indictments in the Michael Brown and Eric Garner cases? And how does that compare to what was happening on college campuses in the 1960s, places like Spelman? How have you seen that evolve over time?
Well, one of the things that I think is probably most important relative to today versus then is the presence of social media, right? So when we think about the fact that our students at Spelman can communicate with students all over the world, really, not just the nation, in an instant through Twitter and other forms of social media. That makes a huge difference. Of course, the Spelman women were very actively engaged in the Atlanta protests here, and we have seen the documentary about the foot soldiers, the class of 1964.
Can you share a little bit about that for those?
Sure. Well, for those who don't know, the Spelman women were very important in their involvement in the civil rights era, and in particular, the class of 1964 was very engaged. In particular, I want to lift up the Appeal for Human Rights, which was a document that was published in the local paper, written by the SGA leaders of Spelman, Morris Brown College, Clark College, Atlanta University. All of them came together, but it's pretty widely recognized that it was the SGA president of Spelman College, Rosalind Pope, who was the primary author of this document, which was really a manifesto asserting the rights of an appeal for human rights, but asserting the importance of civil and human rights for young people who said, we are not going to sit idly by and wait for access to quality education, access to healthcare, access to criminal justice, access to social justice as it relates to the court system, access to the vote. These are things that are important to us as young people, and we are asserting our rights. That was a very powerful document. Many people, including the governor of the state of Georgia, didn't believe it could have been written by students because it was so well written. He alleged that it was outside agitators, but in fact, it was students, and they were leading on the front lines, sit-ins, and I can see that you see pictures on the screen of women from that era who were committed to bringing about social change. Today, our students are also committed about bringing about social change, but it does manifest itself differently. So right after the Ferguson incident, Michael Brown failure to indict, that students were, of course, out protesting. We saw a march from campus to CNN, but not just that one march. Certainly students are continuing to, around the country, continuing to communicate with one another. I was speaking at an event here in Atlanta with a group of educators on Saturday, teachers from around the country, and there were some teachers who were from St. Louis who were talking about, 183 days of protest since the Ferguson decision, and that there are people who are still engaged in that. But I think what we see on our campus is that students are concerned about that issue, but not just that issue. I want to acknowledge the presence of Spelmanites in the room, and in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Cynthia Spence, who is the director of our Social Justice Fellows Program at Spelman, and our Social Justice Fellows are among the most active of our student population, and they're concerned about a lot of things. Human trafficking, for example. They've just recently hosted a program at Spelman about human trafficking and what can we do about that. Students are concerned about domestic violence. They're concerned about misogyny and the way women are being treated. I thought it was very interesting to hear President Obama's statement at the Grammys talking about the importance of artists and addressing the issues related to sexual violence. Our students have for a number of years been speaking up about the way women are represented in the media and how that contributes to violence against women. So there are lots of things that students are concerned about.
Are you seeing different methods of approaching these different kinds of problems, human trafficking, domestic violence, civil rights, in terms of protest or what students are actually doing, or or is it very similar?
I think there are some similarities. I mean, of course, the importance of showing up.
Right.
If you think about, having watched the movie Selma just recently, and you're thinking about the power in numbers, right, of people showing up. But I'm going to come back to social media as another way of showing up, right? I mean, I'm thinking about, as a college president, I'm active on Twitter, most of what I tweet about is specific to celebrating the accomplishments of our students or things that are happening on the campus. But right after the failure to indict in the Michael Brown case and Eric Garner, and we could talk about multiple instances. I'm thinking about the tweeting that was going on, hashtag Black Lives Matter, of course, being an example, hashtag I Can't Breathe. And then I thought this was really interesting in terms of the coalition building, cross-racial coalition building, the white people young people who were tweeting about criming while white, hashtag criming while white, talking about my experience. They're posting experiences that they were having as young white youth, having encounters with the police that did not end in being arrested, sometimes ended in being driven home and turned back over to one's parents. That the treatment in the criminal justice system, and speaking up to say, this is not my experience. As a white person, I'm having an experience that's different than my Black and brown classmates, and wanting to speak up about that.
Wow.
In social media.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
And it's powerful. It's a powerful way of creating the dialogue that Dr. Vivian talked about.
Exactly.
Across social media, and you can be in your living room and someone in their living room across states and sharing those kind of powerful ideas. So
exactly.
Fascinating. You mentioned the Social Justice Fellows program, and that's a program that encourages the development of social justice advocates and scholars. What do you see developing in the academic communities across the country and globally, and how do programs like that reflect the impact of the civil rights movement, both past and present?
Well, I think one of the things that's really exciting about our program and other programs that address these kinds of issues is helping students think about not only thinking critically about the issues, but then what can they do about them? Sort of going from having a concern to thinking about public policy, thinking about how do I use the tools that I'm gaining, whether that's, being able to write, being able to speak, being able to solve problems. How do I advocate for social change? Sometimes we see, I think this is a trend across the nation, there's a lot of interest in this generation in making a difference, of course, but a lot of that translating into volunteer work. Right, volunteering in local organizations, really wanting to make a difference in terms of your own hands-on participation. But then how does that translate into public policy? How do I think about homelessness and translate that into, yes, I can volunteer at a homeless shelter, but what public policy is related to that? And I think the Social Justice Fellows program really is intended to help young people think about the kind of policy decisions that we make, that they can make. And of course, that translates into not just advocacy at the protest level, but in my opinion, certainly, hopefully also in terms of voting. After I saw Selma, someone asked me, what did I think about it? And I said, I hope everyone who sees it realizes how important it is to vote.
Right.
And when I think about voting behavior among young people, we can see certainly in national elections, presidential elections, high levels of turnout, not so much so in mid-year elections, midterm elections. And as we know, those are important too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was wondering, as a college president of an HBCU that has this tradition of protest, how do you balance encouraging students to protest, to be out, to be active, with also the emotions that probably run high around some of these issues? And how do you, basically encourage that tradition, but also balance safety, balance things boiling over? Is that a challenge ever for you in that role?
Not so much. Let me just say this. I graduated from high school in 1971. I graduated from high school in 1975. One of the things that's really striking to me, and I see this in my own children, right? My sons, I have two sons who are now 28 and 32. But when I see college students today versus the kind of college student I was, I think they are much less likely to boil over. I just want to say that, and I don't mean that in a critical way, but, sometimes I was recently talking to a faculty member who told me that students were asking permission to do something. And as a president, I appreciate it when they ask permission. But when I was a student, I wasn't asking anybody's permission, And I find it just interesting, that if students want to protest, that they feel like they should ask somebody about it.
Does that impact their efficacy? I mean, that's an interesting point that you made. Are they less effective as social advocates and protesters?
I don't want to overgeneralize. Okay. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I do think that there is a sense of so I don't want to overgeneralize, but what I want to say is when we talk, sometimes we talk about helicopter parents. Right. People know what I mean by helicopter parents. And, that phrase, that parent that's sort of hovering over, trying to make sure everything is okay and is very protective. And I think if you grow up with a helicopter parent, the flip side of that is a kid that's sort of looking for people to protect them all the time, right? And so I am always a little intrigued by that. Now, that said, I am Dr. Spence, our director of the Social Justice Fellows Program, knows that there are activists on our campus who don't need anybody's permission. And so I am not wanting to overgeneralize, but I do think that there is something about this generation of students, and by that I mean the 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds of today, that's not quite as on fire as maybe previous generations were, and perhaps that is because they've experienced a level of comfort that their predecessors didn't. That's right. That said, I do think that the Michael Brown case and the Eric Garner case and Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis and, Renisha McBride, I mean, these situations have been kind of a wake-up call. Right. For this generation, because they are really coming to terms with the fact that, things are maybe not as worked out as I thought they were. And that I think is a really important message. I want to, I was thinking about, if you think about this, right, this is 2015, and if you were born in the year 2000, you're 15 years old today. So let's go back to 1995. If you were born in 1995, you're 20 years old today. But in, the first election of President Obama was 2008. So you were 13 years old. Well, no, not quite. Yes, you were 13 years old. If you were born in 1995, you were 13 years old when President Obama was elected. And most of your coming of age has been during a time when there was an African-American president. Mm-hmm. And whatever you might say about the symbolism of that or the lack thereof, right, that's a very different experience than, when I was 13, Dr. King was assassinated. So being 13 when Dr. King's been assassinated versus being 13 when President Obama is elected, that's a very different set of life experiences and assumptions about how the world works. And I think that's part of what we see here today.
That's an excellent point, and I'm really interested in the comment about being on fire and the formative experiences that people have that lead to how much you're on fire or whether you're on fire. Yes. This might be a good time to bring up our next guest, who's very active in a lot of the things that are going on today. So I'd like to welcome our third speaker, the Reverend Dr. Francys Johnson. Thank you for joining us, and I wanted to say that Dr. Johnson is a civil rights attorney, educator, and pastor. He is currently the state president of the Georgia NAACP, the state's largest and oldest civil rights and human rights organization. And in this capacity, Dr. Johnson testified before Congress on the Voting Rights Amendment Act, and we're excited to hear from you today about that experience, other challenges facing today's civil rights movement, and some of the things that today's generation are out doing on multiple issues and multiple fronts. So again, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've been active in convening a protest movement that is, I think, relatively new in the Southeast, but you are focused on Georgia, and it's called Moral Mondays. And in fact, you're just returning from an event at the state capitol for Moral Mondays. So I was wondering if you could tell this audience a little bit about what that movement is about, and does it reach back to the protest traditions of the 1960s civil rights movement?
Thank you very much for asking the question. And I think it takes us back to an intersection that Dr. Vivian spoke about, and that was the moral imperative that needed to be made in that moment. And what Moral Monday seeks to do is to say to politicians and policymakers that our morality is stated in terms of our budget, in terms of the laws that we pass, and that morality has to be based on a different set of values than the ones that we have based policies on before. What benefits the few, the privileged, and those who are already so entrenched into the bounties of this country, that we have an obligation to look out for the least and the leftover and those who are not considered. And so that's what Moral Monday seeks to do, and it seeks to do it in a different way, but it borrows heavily from the traditions that Dr. Vivian spoke about. My understandings of race shapes the way we lead the association now, which is differently than has been led before. I clearly understand that at the root of racism and sexism and homophobism and all of the other isms are some common threads. They're all legally constructed. And so leading an association that has a history primarily in the law and deconstructing race where it exists is a great privilege. And we are retooling this organization to do that work. And that's why we're going to need many of the bright minds here at Alston and Byrd to do it. First of all, we need your intelligence and we need your money. The lawsuit in Fayette County, for example, to do what every first-year law student knows is a per se violation of the Constitution at large elections. It took us $1 million to prove that point. And they're still appealing it. It's going to take us another $250,000 to win again on the appeal. That's hard to do, and that's why we need your help. But at the root, it's a legal construction that is still socially maintained, confers way too many economic benefits, and it's still politically expedient for folks to exploit. That's at the root of all of those issues. So Moral Monday seeks to convene folks who would normally be working in their silos. So the Georgia Organization of Women is working on women's issues, and Georgia Equality is working on same-sex issues, and we're working on race issues. When in a real sense, if we just go below the surface, we'll find a root that is common across all of those struggles. And so Moral Monday will strike a blow at that common root.
That's wonderful to hear about, and you touched on this about the fact that you're building alliances,
right,
and you're reaching across difference that is either perceived or real. Can you talk about how you're doing that and how that has resulted in success for the Moral Mondays movement?
Well, we start by telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that from the standpoint of race is a fiction. Talk to any scientist, any biologist, and they will tell you that what we call race, I'm not talking about those important cultural distinctions that accumulate around a set of circumstances and environments, but race, the coarseness of one's hair, the broadness of one's nose, or the composition of melanin in one's skin, is isolated gene pools reproducing similar traits. In other words, people who have children with people who look like them tend to have children that look like them. But these phenotypical distinctions are just that. They don't go to the heart of what a person can achieve or learn or do. So that where there are differences in achievement, and there certainly are gaps in achievement, those aren't accounted to the coarseness of one's hair.
Right.
Those are accountable to discrimination.
Right.
Discrimination is racism in practice. I don't believe that racism is primarily about hate. I think hate is a byproduct of it, but racism is a political theory. It's at its heart, politics, as Harold Eswell defines it, is who gets what, when, where, and how. And racism and sexism and all the other isms help us to quickly determine how we're going to allocate resources. So we start by telling the truth that race is a fiction. Start by telling the truth that this world has enough for everyone. There's a lie that suggests that there's not enough. And so we've got to get into our tribes and get into our own interest groups and fight over what we think is a pie that won't satisfy. But there is more than enough on this planet for everyone.
That's right.
We start by telling the truth, which is that we're all better when we can look each other in the eyes and see the other person for the humanity that they represent. And that is not about the advantage of one group or the other. That's about benefiting all. So start by telling the truth. And secondly, by recognizing the structural issues that remain in racism. I'm reading a fascinating book now, Racism Without Racist.
Mm-hmm.
During your time, folks were avowed racist. No one today will say that they are a racist.
Yeah.
But certainly, when I look at the fact that in Georgia, the median income for a white family with the same education, similarly situated, even working at the same company, is $51,000. For a black family, similarly situated, $31,000. That's not about the broadness of one's nose or the kinkiness of one's hair. That's about discrimination in practice. And so you have to work at that, realizing something about structural racism or structural sexism. As you lower barriers in one area, new obstacles are erected. So whereas you had to have someone vouch for you to become a member of the bar in 1955, now you have to pass a bar examination. And there are going to be continual obstacles that are lifted, and we need a strong association that's focused on dismantling the rest of the structural racism that exists in this country.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about this sort of realization that many in the younger generation are having that maybe they didn't have prior to some of the events of the past year. You, as state president of the NAACP, were at ground zero with a lot of those protest movements. And I think one of the things that surprised a lot of people is how quickly they spread, how intense they were, how some of the tactics seem new and different to many of us, die-ins and disruption of businesses and going on the interstate. Can you just tell us, from kind of having lived it, what caught fire this time? What led to the nationwide protests, led to them lasting as long as they did, led to some of these tactics that many of us had not seen for a while?
Well, at one level, you have these structural inequalities that continue to grow year by year, and we have a middle class that's quickly being decimated. We have systems that are not operating as designed, and then we have systems that are actually operating exactly how they were designed. So that it is more profitable to put a black man in jail. North Carolina study showed that $185,000 worth of economic activity is generated by putting one person in jail. You got to build the jail, you got to maintain the jail, you got to have judges and lawyers. I know. You got to maintain this apparatus. It's a criminal industrial complex. And we have, in the state of Georgia, guaranteed a private prison company a 90% occupancy.
Right.
The state of Georgia has a lawsuit right now. You may be represented, they may be your clients, I don't know. But suing because we haven't been able to live up to that 90% occupancy. So there's some systems that are working exactly like they're designed to work. And then there's some systems that aren't working at all, so that you can work 52 weeks out of the year. You can work every day, including Saturday and Sundays, and hope that you don't get sick or have to visit your child for a play or production or do any of the things that make for a quality of life, and you can still be below the poverty line. That system is not working. And so in a real sense, you see the pressure building as those young folks look at their parents lose their homes, lose their jobs as the economy contracted structurally. And I know no one wants to say it, but those jobs aren't coming back. They've watched their older siblings move back into the house after graduating from college because the market is not solid in places. This pressure builds and builds. I think we're on the cusp of a third Reconstruction in this country. The first Reconstruction in this country was to right constitutional wrongs, to eliminate race and some of the other inequities from the written language of the Constitution, the three-fifths compromise, the other compromises that maintain the system of slavery even after most of the organized West had abandoned it. If the second Reconstruction, the Reconstruction that you helped to lead, was about applying some political context to those constitutional rights and some social reality to them, then this next Reconstruction is about making an economic statement about the wealth of this country. And it is a conversation that few people want to have, but I see it coming as history again goes on this great cycle.
Speaking of a cycle of history, we are preparing to
Sure.
mark the 50th anniversary of the Selma Marches for Voting Rights. And many believe that voting rights are very much still under attack in this country. As I mentioned at the outset, you had the opportunity to testify before Congress about this issue. Can you tell our guests here today just about that issue for those who may not be following it, because it's maybe not out there as much as you would think, and then talk a little bit about how organizations like the NAACP are working to protest those efforts to turn back the clock on voting rights.
Well, first and foremost, the NAACP does not deal in black and white issues. We deal in red, white, and blue issues. And there's nothing, even Chief Justice John Roberts in the Shelby decision said that voting, of all of the rights that we have as Americans, there's nothing more sacrosanct than the right to vote. It is preservative of all other rights, the right to vote. And that's at the heart of the Selma struggle. So on one level, it's with a great deal of sadness that I'm going to join others in Selma in just a few weeks to celebrate what is, in large part, a victory that's been hollowed out in terms of the Shelby decision and the removing, at each of these critical constructions or reconstructions of our country, there's always been an assertion of federal authority to protect. And there's always been a withdrawal of that authority, which is the signal of a declination. So the promise of the American Revolution and a centralized, strong government that would protect minorities across the country, and once the Constitution is ratified, a withdrawing of that authority. After the Civil War, Georgia is readmitted in 1870 with a race-neutral constitution. We had even stronger protections against discrimination than we have now. And during that period of 1870 to 1896, Plessy, obviously, you had, across the South, coalition of people of black and white and every other ethnicity at that time sent over 900 officials to every office in this country with the exception of the presidency. Senators, congressmen, the General Assembly was full. How then do you go from a period of a race-neutral constitution in 1870 to where racism, legalized segregation is declared the law of the land from the Supreme Court? 1896, it would take less than a generation. In 1911, the last elected member of the House of Representatives who was an African American resigned and went back to Macon. There would not be another cent until our chairman emeritus, Julian Bond, would be elected in 1965. How do you go from a period of, during this period between 1870 and 1896, there was more wealth created than this period. Now we think we're living, but no, they lived during that period of time. Our colleges and universities were created. Our church institutions were founded and established. Great achievement and expansion of America during that period. And it was marked by the declination, by the withdrawal of federal troops from the South.
That's right.
And again, I think the Shelby decision is the withdrawal of federal authority to protect voting rights. And so it was no wonder that on the day Shelby came down, I got calls from Augusta, Georgia, which said that the same plan they sent up to the Justice Department, which was rejected because it desperately impacted minorities and seniors and people and young people, they were going to enact it the next week. They put it on the agenda the same night. In Texas, they disenfranchised 300,000 people by adopting a plan, a purging plan, that had also not cleared the Justice Department. And now we're in a regime where no one even has to announce they want to make a change. In Macon, Georgia, just last week, they were going to close 14 of 30 polling places. And these just happen to be in some of the areas that had the greatest turnout in 08 and 12 and even in this last election. And we're fighting battles we thought we had already won. Mm-hmm. Right now, your university system of Georgia has set up an apartheid system to move away from race and look at issues of ethnicity in terms of undocumented Americans. People who've lived here their whole lives, have graduated from Georgia schools, and are now applying for positions at universities. And we've said that as a policy, you can go to any school except for the top 4 schools. You can't go to the University of Georgia. You can't go to Georgia Tech. You can't go to. We said we will relegate you to what we call the education that you deserve, not to be able to go to these 4 institutions. That's a standing policy of our Board of Regents today. So we really are in the midst of a great struggle. When I think about the army that we lead, it is not fit for the battle.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
While we were integrating Alston and Byrd and taking judgeships and in the second Reconstruction, taking the positions we had already had between 1870 and 1896 that we lost, telling ourselves that we were on our way, we walked away from many of the institutions that were our bridges over troubled waters. And so I'm bothered by the fact that people would jump over themselves to pay $2.5 billion for the Clippers, but we couldn't raise $25 million for Morris Brown. Mm-hmm. I'm deeply concerned that the churches that my 4 parents built just up out of slavery, we're having difficulties maintaining. And that all of our HBCUs, the NAACP, all of our institutions are in ill repair.
That's right.
I lead an army that's 1/5 of the size in terms of membership that existed in 1950. And the folks who are most capable to lead this next stage of the movement have been told for the last 20 or 30 years that you don't need to bother yourself with that. Mm-hmm. It's not going to help you in your career. A young lady just came to me the other day and said, well, I was told by my career officer to not put down my affiliation as the college president of the NAACP because I would be viewed as a troublemaker. You all have to, with these cell phones, we can, in 1 minute, reach more people than Fannie Lou Hamer was able to reach across her life.
That's good.
With the positions that you hold in this firm and the people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, you have more influence than all of those folks who huddled in those rooms when you were crafting the movement that changed America, that changed the world. You are the most capable generation in the world. I think our children and our grandchildren will ask us very difficult questions. How we squandered so great an inheritance, and don't think it can't happen. Because all of that, the NAACP was founded in 1909 because a black man was being lynched every day. All of that great wealth and expansion, founding of colleges and universities, institutions, we were somebody. And we forgot that racism, barriers are lowered, new obstacles are, that freedom itself is a constant struggle. And we've got to struggle in order to maintain and to advance that cause. And so today, unfortunately, an African American is killed in law enforcement custody every 28 hours.
Yep.
Black man lynched every day. A black man dies in police custody every 28 hours. I'm struggling with what that means. I'm struggling with that. And so I hope that there will be many in this room who will be impressed to struggle as well. Frederick Douglass teaches us from history that freedom is a constant struggle. And there can be no progress if folks are unwilling to engage in that struggle. You are men and women who want crops, but you don't want to plow up the ground. You want the beaches and its warm sand, but not the roar of its awful waters. That you want rain, but you don't want thunder and lightning. The NAACP's best work is done when you never know about it, when the person doesn't lose the job, when the school doesn't close the program. Our best work is done like that. But where we need to put feet on the street, then we must, and we will, and we are.
It's powerful. Thank you. Thank you. That was very powerful and a good time for us to open up the discussion because you've introduced a number of very important concepts that I'd love to get the whole panel's view on. I want to start with the concept of the Army and the struggle. To build an Army, once you build an Army, the Army has to have a mission.
That's right.
You're struggling, you got to struggle. Where are you struggling to go and get to? And I remember there's a scene in Selma where the leaders of the marches are debating about what are we trying to do? What do we want them to do? What changes do we want to see? Do we want to attack the voucher system? Do we want to attack the poll tax? What specific change do we want to see coming out of this? Some have said with the more recent movement that it's a broad movement that's less about a specific change than about broader issues like Black Lives Matter. We want law enforcement to respect us as human beings. We want general racial equality. What do you think about, are those the right goals for the Army that we want to put together? Do you need to have more specific goals, or is the goal of having Black Lives Matter enough and sufficient to drive a movement and see change?
Well, I'll tell you what, we were saying that same thing in the last movement. We were saying the same thing about Black Life Matters. We just didn't say it in the same words. But we're still saying it. There isn't, we were talking about racism as racism, right? Before, we're still doing that, right? We have not changed any of the major things completely. Mm-hmm. But what we do have is the means whereby that we can working together, and that sounds rather commonplace if we just work together. But the point being is we're still about it, and we're still in those small groups, but we're not, in fact, committed. We have about the same number of white and black people in the various organizations that we had before. Mm-hmm. All right, which doesn't say that we are really, that are struggling, and whichever word you want to use for it, right, is really affecting enough people to be a real change agent. Yet I can feel change all around me. And I know that we have changed in tremendous ways from what we used to have, right? Yet when I want to see the results of it, I don't see the results as much as I feel different, right? That I'm treated different, et cetera, right? But I don't see the much of the changes that make the difference.
Mm-hmm. Do you all want to comment on that? I think that's important.
Well, I think that Dr. Vivian makes a point in that. So I often tell the story of my father, who was a college professor, now retired. He's 88 years old. When I was born in 1954, I was born in Tallahassee, Florida. My father taught at Florida A&M, and at that time had a bachelor's degree from Howard University, a master's of fine arts from the University of Iowa, wanted to earn his doctorate in his academic career, and could have done so at Florida State. They had the program that he was interested in. But in 1954, even though it was after Brown versus Board of Education, he was not able to attend, right? And so the state of Florida accommodated the Supreme Court ruling, the legislative demand to provide equal access by sending him to Penn State, paid his transportation to Pennsylvania. And so my dad got his doctorate at Penn State University, and when he completed his degree, didn't want to stay in Florida, and moved.
I wonder why.
Moved our family to Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. But I tell that story to say, when we sit here today, people always think, well, what a ridiculous thing, right? Exported their talent. He moved to Massachusetts. I grew up there. And of course, today, when I was seeking my education, I had many choices, and my kids had even more choices than that. So the reality is things have changed. Mm-hmm. But as I sit here and think about the evisceration of the Voting Rights Act, we know that that's critical. And what we assume as cultural changes, and I think about the fact that most of the people in this room could tell a similar story of something that is dramatically different today than it was when they were born or when they were growing up. But yet the threat to our access to democracy is real. That's real. And I think that that's the message that I want our students to, I gave a speech at the opening of school at Spelman not long after that Supreme Court decision. It was a May decision, and, school opened in August, and I was giving a talk about drawing upon language from the Appeal to Human Rights that the class of 1960, it was in 1960 when that came out, with that was written. And one of the things they said is, we're not going to sit idly by and wait for our rights to be delivered to us. And what I said to our students is, are you going to sit idly by and watch your rights be taken away? That really is the question, I think, for this generation. And I'm not sure we're talking enough about it, or that they're talking enough about it, because I do see this erosion that you're talking about, and I think it's really critical.
I'll just add this. I think that what I see in this generation, and they consider me old, by the way. They appreciate that I support the young folks, but I am not considered young by any stretch of the man. And when I think about that, King and Malcolm both dead at 39, you really, in a real sense, by the time you get to 40, you've got to be thinking about your own children and your own life and that sort of thing. And I know those pressures are real. But in a real sense, we have to reinsert a word into our vocabulary called sacrifice. It's a word that you hear so little about these days. It was a real sacrifice for A.T. Walden to leave Macon. He came back after being educated at an institution because Georgia wouldn't pay for it. They wouldn't want him to go to the University of Georgia, so he went somewhere else, came back, and had a successful practice in Macon, and could have done quite well there and lived out a very happy life in Macon for what it was. We came to Atlanta. He was the president of the Atlanta branch of the NAACP, and at that time, to be the branch president of the NAACP was the highest title you could have in our community. I'm looking forward to the day when we bring our best and brightest back to those roles in our communities. And he fought like hell and sacrificed a great deal. And I think we honor and recognize them. But in a real sense, he recognized what I think this generation recognizes as well. It's not enough to just change the players.
That's right.
I think my parents' generation, and I don't want to draw too broad of a generalization. You could be my mom.
I probably could be.
Well, she was born in 1954 as well.
Yes, okay. A good year.
That's right. Very good vintage. That's right. And you could be my granddad.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Stop right there.
Granddad,
Stop
that's right. Stop right there.
I'm like your baby sister. Baby sister. All right.
My sister indeed.
There you go.
But I think the generation before, obviously had a great deal, gained a great deal from the movement that came before them. And they were told to go and occupy, go and take your rightful place. And they did. And they changed the players in the game. I think this generation wants to be game changers. But we've come to realize that if you just change the players and don't change the game, you're still going to get the same outcomes. And that's why Atlanta can be led by black mayors, and every major city in Georgia can be led by black mayors, and we still not see a decrease in unemployment or a rise in mixed income developments or any of the other markers of the qualities of life. Because if you just change the players and you don't change, you've got to be you have the power to be game changers, not to just go along and get along. And I'm hopeful that the president will fully embrace his role as a game changer in these last 2 years. But we can't ask more of him than we would ask of ourselves. You have to change the game within your sphere of influence. And I hope that you will.
I hear you. I love it. Except that let's stop at that president thing.
Okay.
Because it's one thing that every black person since the beginning of this country thought, if we can ever have a black president, then we can get rid of all the problems. Now we knew it wasn't quite right, but we thought it was a lot closer than it is.
Sort of the pot at the end of the rainbow. We never thought we'd get to it.
That's right. That's the kind of stuff, right? Now, see, here's the thing, is that we got a president, and suddenly they could get by with stuff to destroy him that no other president had to face, all right? They would not have even thought of doing things to another white president that they're doing to this one, right? Then you look at Capital, the book, right? And you realize that there isn't anybody in this country right now except a very, very few, all right, that are going to have anything they thought they were going to have, right? See, now, there's a great number of white people in this country that wouldn't vote for him, who him is, right? And but they're being treated, and even though he gives them something they have to have, they still didn't get it, right? They still wanted to talk down to this man of the people who wants to do something that hadn't been done in 60 years of trying in this country, is to make certain that we were all healthy, all right? And poor whites need it as much as we do, and they're poorer right now than they were not too long ago, right? Right? Is that is still the desire to, well, pardon me, I'm going to say it this way. It may not be quite right, right? But just being white still makes more difference than being decent. It makes more difference than even having more wealth with your dollar than you had before. All right? Is that that you can't bring up this subject without dealing with the fact that we who live it still face all the same problems we have. Right? Basically, is that isn't it interesting that we could have thought that the Democratic Party was going to be the same in the South as it was right before he got elected. As soon as he got elected, they shifted from Democrats to Republicans. I mean, it was just overnight. And the two black congressmen we had downstate had to fight like mad to keep their, they fought harder than they've ever fought, because they've told me so, right? To, in fact, win their seats back this time, right? Now, why? It seems like no sooner have we done something for a nation that's good for us all, and those that should appreciate it don't, and those who it really doesn't make a lot of difference for, between they're going to do all right anyway, they appreciate it, right? Or at least talk like it. These guys downstate talk like it until it happened. Mm-hmm. And then they all became Republicans again, right? All right. The people that they had fought against all their lives. But their whiteness was more important than anything they said that was of value to them, right? And the thing is, this is what bothers me about it all, is that and now I'm just going to say two things that may not fit at all, right? but see, is that until people like this room will really talk to poor whites, I don't think much will be done. Until black preachers talk to white preachers, right? Because we're talking about reaching conscience more than we are anything else, right? All right? Because we've tried, we got to think about, there's nothing in America we haven't tried. Think about that. I mean, there really isn't, right? Is that, and no sooner, I was thinking about it as a kid. My grandparents, because we see these things in multiple generations, we're not talking about, right? Is that my parents moved out of Missouri to come to Illinois at the end of at the start of the Depression. Why? Because they thought I would get a better education. Because we'd lost our farms. We had 3 farms, right? And we were, a farm community, right? And so we thought that, boy, that was it. And we just move over. And we had one that had gone to Lincoln. So we had one college graduate, right? And that was, we're talking about the end of the 1920s, you see. It's really, when we shifted over, we saw the Great Depression really hit us, right? In 1930, it was was finally, this was it. The banks closed, and you couldn't get anything, right? So, wow, we said, there's one good thing we've got. And we're going to make certain that no matter what happens, we're going to educate somebody, right? Because that was always the centerpiece of our people. Get an education, and you won't have to worry, right? In fact, so I go to college, right? And I'm an English major when I start, and find out that the department had a Harvard graduate as head of the department, but wouldn't let me join the club. I was reared to think that anybody with an education wouldn't be a racist. I found out right off the bat that
Quite
see,
so.
Yeah.
Right.
See, the point is that every time it seems like we move, we either didn't move far enough. Maybe I should have gone to. Maybe I should have gone to Harvard, right? But it didn't make any difference because who they graduated ended up as a racist that was making certain I didn't join the club. Now, in fact, is that so I couldn't get in, and there was 10 people white kids, right, who told him, we won't join your club if he can't get in. Right.
And I think that's important because you need people to stand with you.
That's it.
You need allies.
And you know what he
There's
said?
a big distinction here that I see, and I think that the language, and we always update the language, and the tactics are similar, but the language is different. I think race is too small. The language of it is too small and narrow. The reason why I know that is because our census hasn't used the same language in any of its 10-year counts. It's just too small, that our political discourse is too narrow, Republican versus Democrat. I'm fighting a bill right now that's on the table in your General Assembly that's going to reduce early voting by a week in exchange for one day of Sunday voting everywhere. It's a horrible compromise. It doesn't expand democracy. So it's not about Democrat or Republican. Matter of fact, the Republicans, what they're doing, they learned while being Democrats. I mean, the gerrymandering of the Democrats is the super gerrymandering of the Republicans. So in the NAACP, we have a phrase, and I say it, we have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, just permanent issues. Mm-hmm. And I think this generation is developing a sense of what those issues are. That if we're going to call out these values that everyone wants a good, decent education for their children that prepares them for global opportunities. We want fair criminal justice system, access, unfettered access to the ballot, healthy communities. These are things that all Americans want, that the whole world wants. Yeah. Then we can't be silent to the president's droning of people, just as you all weren't silent against Vietnam. Yeah. And when you let the issues and your values guide you, you get back to a moral compass.
Yeah,
I think
is there a moral compass in America? This is what we're really talking about.
That's
right?
a good question.
Is it, yeah, see what I mean? Because the ministers don't talk about love your neighbor as yourself.
That's right.
All right, and that's the center of the gospel. Right. All right, is that when we see that we can have perfect good health if it only goes to white people, right? That's the way they talk about it, right? Is that so that the point being is when we come up to get it, then it's those lazy so-and-sos, all right, who if they worked as hard as we do, then they would be all right Get my point?
And and unfortunately, I
Yeah,
know
keep
we are
going,
running
sis.
out of
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
and we would love to continue this conversation. But Dr. Tatum, I didn't want you to miss out on the opportunity to comment on that, and then we will wrap up.
Well, I want to close, if I might,
Yes.
by simply saying how important it is for all of us to have an understanding of our history. Because if we know our history, I think it helps us better understand what we need to do to prepare for our future. And I really want to commend the work of the NAACP in this context, because so many of the current battles are foreshadowed by our understanding of history.
Thank you.
Thank
An
you for this
excellent way
opportunity.
to close. And before I bring up our national diversity partner, John Latham, to close us out, I just would ask all of you to join us in thanking these amazing guests today. Thank you so much.
You know we're trying, don't we? We should be clapping back at me. All right, but we'll do all right. Thank you.
Well, let me come up and thank everybody on behalf of my co-chair, Carrie Dawson, the Diversity Committee, the Diversity Task Force. I'd like to thank everyone here for attending, all the folks in the other offices. Special thanks always goes to the Diversity Task Force that puts on such incredible programs. Thank you all again for what you've done. More importantly, the three doctors, Dr. Vivian, Dr. Tatum, and Dr. John. Incredible people. I'll confess I knew Dr. Vivian's work and Dr. Tatum's work a little bit more than yours, but certainly you've enlightened us, and we appreciate all of you being here. Another great job by Angela. We always come to expect that. Thank you so much. So another great presentation. Go forth and live what you've learned. Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Just sort of hanging on.
If you all press